Hello everyone, welcome back to another From the Depths tutorial. Today, we're going to be taking a look at what makes the AI brain tick. Welcome to the tutorial about AI. We're going to be talking about the mainframe and the weapon controller, how to set your weapons up properly, etc. So first, let's dive right in with the AI mainframe. Arguably the most important thing to have on your ship if you want to have the AI take control of it for you during the battle. Doing things like sailing around, shooting your guns, etc. You can give it a name if you press Q, which is lovely. But let's get into the meat of things. Over here on the AI tab we have the mainframe itself. We have the AI card slots, which make the mainframe do things. So we're going to be placing down a mirror line, we're going to be placing a front and back one. The only real thing that changes is how they attach. There we go, just for comparison. Now, then we have the left and right, front and back card slots. Let's turn off mirror mode because we're going to be talking about cards. There's Naval AI, there's Sailing AI, there's Aerial Start, there's Water Start, Target Prioritization, Aim Point Selection, Target Tracker, Tracker Target Association, Fortress AI, Propulsion Balancing, and Patrol. Let's start up here. Naval AI, arguably the most important AI to have if you're building a boat. If you press Q, it will tell you to enter all sorts of things, and it will give you a general description here. Let's start at the top here. Enter broadside below this range. So if you get below this range, the AI is automatically gonna turn around, show its guns depending on the angle that you set. And that's pretty much that. We can turn that up all the way to 2990. And then we can tell it to leave broadside above this range, which means that it will start closing to get to just below 3000 meters in this case. Nominal broadside angle ranges from 0 to 180. So if you want to, if you have like frontal cannons and nothing on the back, you want to have like a shallow angle of like 5 degrees so that you are sort of angled. If you want to have all the guns on the rear firing as well, then you want to go for 90. And if you want to keep your distance, you might want to go for like 170 degrees. So basically 10 degrees is still sailing towards them, but only having your frontal guns being able to fire. 90 degrees is having all your guns front and back being able to fire. And 170 degrees is sailing away with only your rear guns being able to fire. Of course, you can set everything from 0 to 180. There's a little weirdness sometimes with 0 and 180, so I suggest going for like 5 or 10 or something like that. Then there's the broadside minimum range. Your ship will never go below this distance. If it does, it will automatically seek to increase the distance if possible. So if you have a faster ship and it is below its minimum range, it will try and get further away. And seeing how it is the faster ship in this scenario, then you will have no problems keeping range, maybe staying out of range of their more accurate guns. Or perhaps out of range of their guns at all. For example, smaller guns that might have a limit set in their weapon controller to how far they can fire. Idle approach distance is basically when there's nobody else around, it will try to keep a distance of 50 meters to anything friendly. Only counts when there is no actual enemies around, so keep that in mind. Then you have the turning circle, which is basically something you have to keep in mind and sort of predict roughly. Like, if you have a bigger ship, you're gonna have a bigger turning circle, which means that the AI, if you give it the incorrect turning circle, like way too small, which is bad, you might smack into friendlies because, well, it turns out you weren't able to steer in the turning circle that you gave your AI, and the AI was like, oh yeah, sure, we can handle this, but in reality, your ship couldn't handle it, and you smack into one another. And lastly, there is the depth requirement. So basically how much of your ship is below the water. You gotta sort of estimate that, but of course, once you have something built and in play, you can just have it float in the water. You can just count 1 meter by 1 meter, so you can get a reasonable estimate on that. And you can also tell it to disable reverse, which can be useful, depending on the situation. You can also press reset, so you reset everything here. Alright, that's pretty much that. Now let's talk about Sailing AI. We can configure it to do some stuff, but there's not really that much in there. Basically, this will help your ship with sailing. It will automatically tell the AI the wind direction, that sort of thing. And I haven't really messed around with these too much, but they're probably useful. Great tutorial, I know. Next up is going to be the aerial AI. Planes! We have angle deviation before turn started. So basically, if you need to go a couple degrees to the left, it can be ignored, or you can just be like, yeah, I want to always point straight where I need to go next. It depends on what kind of plane you have. Angle deviation before we roll the turn. So planes have 3 different axes. They have the yaw, they have the pitch, and they have the roll. In this case, pitch doesn't apply because we're just trying to go horizontally. Basically, the angle deviation before we roll the turn, if you set that high, the plane's always going to try to yaw using the tail planes. And if you set it low, and it will just roll and try and use a combination of pitch, roll, and yaw to get to the right place at the right time, etc. Next up, the most extreme roll we aim for to facilitate a roll-based turn. It's a bit of a mouthful, but basically, the further you set it, like for example, if we are facing 90 degrees on the side, never mind, it would get too complicated. You know what, I'll give you a practical demonstration. Let's load in the Wing V2. There we go. It's a small little ship, plane. Got some AI set up on here. It's gonna try and roll around now. And because we have set the extreme roll angle to like 50 degrees, it's not gonna go much further. But then again, because it doesn't have that much roll control, it might go a bit further. Now if we turn this down to like 9 degrees, you can see we're barely rolling at all. If we set it to 145 degrees, we're gonna go down into the water. That's something you want to keep in mind. Let's just get that back to 50 right now. Then we have cruising altitude and minimum altitude. So if we set this all the way up to 800, for example, the plane's gonna try and fly around 800 meters, which it's never gonna be able to do because there's no atmosphere up there. So you want to try and keep that reasonable, and keep in mind that the air is thinner around, it starts thinning out at like 250, 300 meters, that sort of thing, and you have zero thrust up and around 500 meters with these jet engines. Next up is the minimum altitude, which is basically the altitude that your plane will drop everything if it's down below that altitude, and will try to get back up as quickly as possible. And using a combination of cruising altitude, minimum altitude, extreme roll, and all that sort of thing, you can make sure that you try and keep in the air properly. Now, let's talk weapons, because the aerial AI has options for weapons. Distance beyond which we begin an attack run. So if this plane gets 700 meters away from an enemy ship, it will drop its things, what it's doing, turn to face the enemy ship, and start attacking it. It's pretty simple. And then there's a distance below which we abort the attack run. If we get too close, for example, we want to try and stop trying to attack it, we want to fly away, get to that 700 meter distance, then we're going to turn around again, we're going to blast our faces off. There's also time elapsed before we force another attack run. So for example, if they are on our tail, or we are just trying to fly around a little bit, this will automatically force it to engage. If you want to keep this low, it's good for fighters, because fighters are nimble, they tend to turn around a lot. They want to try and get on each other's tail, so that they have a shot while the other plane theoretically doesn't. At least that is how our planes work, at least. In front of that you can have turrets facing all sorts of different directions, etc. All bets are off, but generally you want to keep this low for fighters and maybe higher for other planes. Depends on what you need, really. It's depends, yeah, really on what you need. Next up is water start. Can be combined together with the aerial AI. So for example, if we go back to our wing, I said if we were to go back to our wing, I am now going to purposefully sabotage it to show you what the actual water start does. We have some hot air balloon deployers here, which we got from the air tab over here. Let's get a switch to deploy them manually, but we are talking AI here today, so we're not going to do that. As soon as we need to turn, we are going to go down into the water at some point. And then when we do, I mean, we just have to start rolling. There we go. I'm going to go down into the water. And the balloons have deployed automatically. That is what the water start is for. You can set a starting altitude, so for example 10 meters and then 60 meters to end, and then you will automatically get balloons deployed and cut whenever you need to get out of the water. It's basically pretty simple. It's really useful. You might have some issues getting your plane set up with high thrust, etc., but that's why I find to have the balloon deployers in the front of this little plane here, it solved the problem for me. You might have another fix. It really depends on the actual plane itself. Now, then let's get back to cards. We have target prioritization, which is an important one to talk about, which is for weapons. If we look in here, we can see the value per block, per weapon, crew, player, I think AI as well, value per propulsion, engine, and then range, speed, and altitude. So we're going to go through these one by one. Basically, set value per block. Each block now by default gives 0.10 value to a target, and it will attack the highest target, obviously. But we can set it all the way up to 1. So this will basically tell it to target bigger things, bigger ships, bigger planes, that sort of thing. We have value per weapon, which I keep high because, well, you want to kill the thing that has as many weapons. Then there's crew, player, AI, that sort of thing. The more crew it has, like AI walking around on board or actual players, it can be more important to target that. You don't really need that in the standard campaign, I find. But there's also things like value per propulsion, so if you want to stop a ship dead in its tracks, or if you want to kill a fast moving thing, you want to target the thing with propulsion. And then there, of course, set value per engine. Again, which leads to bigger ships being targeted first, or just giant laser death things. Then there is set value per range, fairly straightforward. You can set it to target distant things, or target closer things by default. You can also set it to ignore speed, or not target fast things. You can tell it to target fast things, or not at all. You can set it to be like, oh, we want to favor altitude for AA guns, etc. Or submarines for those super cavitator cannons that you might have. Next up is the aim point selection, which is not configurable and automatically targets things like ammo barrels, AI, and other weak points, which is nice. And then we have the tracker target association. Will assign clever target. Will allow clever assignment of targets to tracker. So basically this works in conjunction with the target prioritization and works with the manual constraints that you can actually set on turrets, etc., and guns itself. We'll take a look at that in a second when we start working on the weapon controller. For now, just know that it is pretty useful. Now we have Fortress AI, which is generally not something I use, but it's still there. Can't configure it or anything, but yeah. We'll run basic Fortress controls. It will turn to face targets and move into resource zones to gather resources. We have propulsion balancing, which we can't place on here because this is actually a fortress. So let's quickly talk about propulsion balancing. It takes all the propulsion, axes, etc., and it pretty much maxes them out. So if you do happen to lose like a few thrusters, you will have this card activating already, or straight away, and it should balance out the force. So instead of planes flying wildly out of control, you might have a semblance of coordination going on anyway. And then lastly there is patrol, which is basically you can give things in this mode. You can set the modes of AI here, by the way. Here you can set it to patrol, and that way you can set up patrol routes, which in my opinion doesn't actually work, I believe. It's like, yeah, you can just set up waypoints, or it might be a special way. I will actually go check it and I'll be right back. I found it! And there we go. If you press N and then set this, you can set control routes in here, I believe. There we go, now it should, hopefully. Even when pulled out of play. I don't think it really works out of play, but it might be able to work in play. But yeah, as it stands, I don't really see any use for them, but it's a cool thing, I guess. Wing V2, want you to have route 0. Yeah, you can hold shift, by the way, to queue multiple things. Now we have this, but I don't actually think it's working. So I might do a follow-up about that at some point. I don't know, but as it stands, it doesn't seem like something that is that useful. Let me quickly check. No, I don't really see anything, unfortunately, but yeah. At least you can use it to set move orders in the actual, when it's in play, so it sort of has a use, but I wouldn't call it great. Anyway, moving on, let's pull the platform back in play, shall we? Just lift it out of the water a little bit, because that's what I like to see. Right, I think that covers all the cards. Next up we have the flag post. If you connect this to your AI, you'll get a flag. If you don't, you'll get a pirate flag, which is admittedly also cool. But you can set a custom logo, etc. You can connect it sideways, by the way. I don't have a logo set up right now, but if you would, this would be showing your local icon. So this is how the Deepwater Guard, the Onyx Watch, the White Flames, etc. all show their little flag and color. Then you have AI connectors, 5 and 6-way. Not really sure why you would ever use the 5-way, except it's a little bit cheaper. There's the enemy simulator, which is a thing you can press and you can set a certain duration. This will tell it to become an enemy for a little while, which can be useful. You can put a build conduit on here that allows you to build on here from other ships, which I never really used, really. Oh, accessible via the strategic GUI, which is pressing N. Okay, well, not really that useful. These are iffy. They're not really useful. The detector, the tracker, and the radar system, they're not really useful. The AI pretty much already does that, so we're not gonna pay much attention to them. We've got the wireless transmitter over here, and the wireless receiver, and we have set those up actually. For example, if we are building this local weapon controller far away from our mainframe, we're gonna need a wireless transmitter on board. And we have 5 different settings. If you press Q, you can set it to channel 1, 2, 3, 4, or off. I don't know why you would ever turn it off, but you have the option to. The Fortress AI is at work here, by the way. It's dragging us to the resource zone, so let's turn that off. There we go. That's a little neat thing. But yeah, we can, of course, set things to different channels. So for example, if I put a prioritization on here for AA guns, we can set it to a separate channel, so only this one will fire with these settings, which is pretty neat. Next up we have the proportional integral derivative controller, which is a mouthful for anyone. This allows you to set up things like aerial yaw, naval roll, etc. This sort of looks like it is intimidating, but let me spawn in another vehicle, which I actually use a PYD on. We'll call in the helicopter. There we go. I'm going to be going in here. No, pay no mind to the explosives. We have it set in aerial pitch mode right now. Red is the demand, the system set point. It's the demand. Green is the process variable, PV. It's the current value. We're trying to shift them there. We are in aerial. We should be in aerial pitch. Yeah, there we go. Aerial pitch. There's a bunch of different modes, from naval yaw, so it can help boats, it can help planes. But yeah, this graph also shows the control variable, the output from the PYD, to help try and balance the current value to the red demanded value. And then there's the white line, which is the value of the integral term, which is I times KP divided by time Y, which is all things that you can figure down here. It sounds never mind that. It sounds terribly complicated, but it's actually rather simple. KP gain is like the size of changes, so the higher you set this, the bigger the white line is going to be, and the bigger your response. And the game recommends just keep it at 0.01 like we do now. We have the integral time, which is basically how long the controller will try to cancel the accumulated integral. Which sounds like a lot, but yeah. You see, we can try turning it up and down. I personally, from experience on this plane, set it to 1. Basically, yeah, how do I explain this really? See, why is the integral time here? Down below it says right there, if you set it to 2 seconds, the system will try to correct all previously integrated errors in the course over the next 2 seconds. So basically, this is how long it will take to correct the current value it's been given, and how high or below demand you actually are. So we can see it was a bit wild in the beginning, now we're fluctuating right around that red line, really smooth. Then we have TD, it's the derivative time. It will predict the error like 1 second in advance in this case. So we can see coming from past behavior what is to come, and it will automatically predict based on that. So you can see we are flying quite stable now. If we turn this to no control task, we spin out of control. BYDs can be used effectively, you just need to know how to set them up. Lastly, KP is the system gain, as it explains down here. Start with very small numbers, and basically, if it gets too high, you're gonna have output saturated, and it's not gonna be useful. You'll be overkilling your machine, and it's not gonna be helping you out with what you need. Yeah, I hope that makes things a little more clear about PYDs. Let's just let that go off in the sunset and forget all about those. Next up we have laser and missile warners. So let's take a regular AI connector here. We can set it up with laser warners and then connect a smoke dispenser to the top of it. Now, important to note, for these to be working you need to connect them up with a wireless receiver. And now, when there is laser damage within up to 20 meters of this block, you can configure this all. You can deploy smoke. And it will deploy all the smoke launchers within 10 meters of this block, detecting it, if there is laser damage hitting within 20 meters. And you can deploy up to this many smokes, which is basically how many blocks you can trigger. And then there's a period between warnings. So you want to be able to give your smoke cooldown, etc. And of course, turn it off or on. Then there is the smoke dispenser settings, which does use fuel and smoke. But yeah, if you have enough fuel and ammo to spare, etc., it can really help take away from all the laser damage. Very useful for fighting against the lightning hoods, etc. Same goes for the missile warner. It will automatically allow you to fire anti-missile missiles, and the anti-missile missiles actually require these missile warners to have a line of sight. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to target the missiles. Same goes for laser defense, by the way. You need these missile warners to have a line of sight to be able to use your laser anti-missile systems. So be sure to hook these up and actually have them working and connect it up to a working mainframe. Now, let's finally talk about how to set weapons up. Local weapon controller. It's going to give you minimum range, maximum altitude, maximum speed, minimum number of blocks, and maximum fire rate. So basically, these are pretty straightforward. If you want to stop it attacking anything below a certain amount of range, set that. If you want to stop it from attacking further than a specified amount of range, because the shells fall off and disappear like cram cannons, you might want to set those to target at max like 3000 meters or just below that, so that the shells don't actually despawn before hitting them. Then you want to use that. If you want to stop it from targeting submarines, you can set it to target only above 0 altitude. If you want to stop it targeting flyers because you're targeting boats, you want to use minimum altitude, you can set a maximum speed. So for example, you don't want to go wasting clamshells on a fast moving boat that's going to wiggle around all the time. You can have minimum number of blocks set for if you only want to target large vehicles with cram cannons, for example. And you can set your maximum fire rate in here. Now let's quickly cram in something about turrets and the actual target association. If we go in turrets here, we can enable extra constraints. Right now we can target anywhere, but if we set up extra constraints, hold E to stop the mouse rotating the actual thing, we can set a minimum azimuth and a maximum azimuth. So let's go with -90 and 90. And let's also set it to group 1. There we go. Now we can only target things in this field of fire. And this basically works with the little AI card that was track our target association. So this will only track things with the highest priority in this angle. So that pretty much wraps up AI. One last thing of note. AI weapon controllers can control any weapon on a turret provided they are up to 2 blocks away. There we go. This is the maximum range you can have things away. So either place your firing piece right over here for the actual AI to be able to control it, or place it on the turret, which is max 2 blocks away. If you keep that in mind, you're not going to have any problems. Oh, I also forgot to mention the fact that there is a failsafe. Failsafes are pretty important. They stop the AI from accidentally hitting its own vehicle. You can set it up in here, like you can set a radius for it to check in. It's going to send 3 rays of 5 to 100 meters. And basically you can use this to configure that it doesn't shoot its own ship, which is pretty useful. So, that was AI. Let me know down below if you learned something. I hope you did. Anyway, if you like this tutorial, please do leave a like down below so that others know that this is a tutorial that they might be able to learn something from. And why don't you leave a comment down below if you have anything to say. And until next time, have a good one, folks.